The trail didn't have a name on any official document. It wasn't on any government map. It was just the route cattle took from Texas to Kansas because the grass was good and the rivers could be crossed, and at the end of it, a longhorn worth $4 in San Antonio was worth $40 in Abilene. That math was all the map any cowboy needed. Texas after the Civil War had a problem and an opportunity that were the same problem and the same opportunity. The problem: the cattle markets of the Confederacy were gone. The Confederate economy was gone. Texas ranchers who had been running longhorns on open range for a decade had enormous herds and no buyers. The opportunity: the Union had a railroad and a hunger for beef. And a longhorn steer worth $4 in South Texas was worth 10 times that in the rail markets of the North. The obstacle between the problem and the opportunity was approximately 1,000 miles of open country. In 1867, a cattle broker from Illinois named Joseph McCoy had an idea. He convinced the Kansas Pacific Railroad to build a stockyard at a small settlement at the end of the line in central Kansas, a place called Abilene. He sent word south, "Bring cattle here, and I will buy them." The route that cattle drives took from South Texas to Abilene ran north through the Indian Territory along a path that traders, missionaries, and indigenous people had been using for generations. A Cherokee trader named Jesse Chisholm had used the northern portion of the route in the 1860s to supply trading posts. His name attached to the trail as the word spread south. The Chisholm Trail was never surveyed, never formally designated, never mapped by any government agency. It was simply the best route from where the cattle were to where the money was. And it was good enough that 3 million head traveled it over 17 years. The mathematics of the cattle drive were severe. A herd of 2,000 longhorns required roughly 12 to 15 men to move it. A trail boss, a cook with a chuck wagon, cowboys on point and flank and drag, and a wrangler for the remuda of spare horses. The drive from South Texas to Abilene or Dodge City covered between 800 and 1,200 miles, depending on the year and the specific route, and took 3 to 4 months. The men doing this work were young. The median age of a Texas cowboy in the drive era was around 22. They were paid roughly $30 a month, which was better than farm labor and significantly worse than the mythology of the cowboy life suggested. 1 in 3 was black or Mexican, a proportion that is invisible in the paintings and the movies made about this era. The work was continuous, unglamorous, and dangerous. River crossings were the most lethal moment. Swimming a herd of 2,000 longhorns across the Red River or the Arkansas in high water killed men and cattle alike. Stampedes in lightning storms could scatter a herd across 5 miles of country and cost days of gather time. The drag position, riding behind the herd, eating dust, was given to the newest and lowest paid hands. The trail boss carried the whole enterprise. He was responsible for the herd, the men, the route, the timing, and the negotiation at the other end. A good trail boss could bring 3,000 cattle to Abilene in 4 months and deliver them in marketable condition. A bad one could lose the herd at a river crossing or hit Dodge City 2 weeks late when the buyer had already left. At the end of the trail were the cattle towns: Abilene, then Newton, then Wichita, then Dodge City. As the railroad moved west and the good grass shifted, the cattle towns were what they needed to be. Places where a month's wages could be deposited in a bank or lost in a saloon or spent in ways that the history books describe with varying levels of frankness. They had a specific, brief, intense economy built entirely on the arrival of Texas cattle money. And they burned hot and fast. Abilene decided it was done with the cattle trade in 1872 and voted the drives out. The same happened in Newton, Wichita. Dodge City held on the longest. running cattle until the mid-1880s and building the mythology of the cowtown in the process. The famous lawmen of the cattle towns. The Earps in Wichita and Dodge. Wild Bill Hickok briefly in Abilene. Were employed specifically to keep the peace between cattlemen and townspeople, which was the central tension every cattle town managed for as long as the drives lasted. The drives ended not with violence but with wire. Barbed wire, invented in 1874, reached the open range in the late 1870s and spread fast. Farmers fenced their properties. States and territories passed fence laws. The open corridor that the Chisholm Trail required, unobstructed grazing from Texas to Kansas, began to close off, section by section, as the agriculture that the railroad had made possible spread across the same country that the cattle had used. Kansas voted out the Texas cattle trade in 1885. The drives that had gone around fenced areas were getting longer and harder and more expensive. In 1887, the last major drives went north. Then the trail, which had never been on a map, simply ceased to be a trail. The grass grew back. The ruts faded. Farmers plowed over the root that 3 million cattle had pressed into the earth. 1 in 3 of the cowboys who drove those cattle was black or Mexican. Many of the black cowboys were freedmen from Texas. Men who had been enslaved on the same ranches where they now worked for wages, which were small, doing the most dangerous and demanding outdoor labor on the continent. They built the cattle industry that built the beef economy that fed a growing industrial nation. The paintings made the cowboys white. The movies made the cowboys white. The mythology of the cowboy, rugged, independent, Anglo, riding into a clean sunset, was assembled from the raw material of what actually happened, which was multiracial, young, underpaid, and often fatal. The mathematics of mythology work the same as the mathematics of the cattle trade. The men who make it rarely own the image. If this story got to you the way it gets to me, hit the like button. Tell the algorithm this history deserves to be found. Share it with someone who thinks they know the West. Subscribe. 60 of these are coming. One era at a time. Subscribe, like, share. I'll see you in the next one.